This episode is brought to you by Curriculum Rehab by us, the team here at Brave New Teaching. It is the first and only teacher PD of its kind, a course to help teachers like you by guiding you through creating your own personal framework for curriculum. You make it work for you, your students, and your unique situation because nobody else knows what the kiddos in your classroom need the way that you do. Curriculum Rehab takes all of the resources available to you, all of the lessons, the assessments, the activities, all of the texts, everything that could possibly be there for you, and it helps you organize what you actually need in order to attain your teaching objectives. These are the strategies that Amanda and myself have used in our own classrooms, have developed over very long years of teaching and figuring things out, combined together to create this framework and these strategies that we can guide you through. This course will give you the tools you need for a complete curriculum overhaul or to start from scratch. Wherever you are on that continuum, it does it all for you and with you on your timeline. So start today, do a little bit more in a couple of months, and then pick it up next summer. It's Teacher PD the way it should be on your own time. Head to curriculumrehab.com/course for more information, or just head to the show notes for this episode. We cannot wait to see you there. It's finally time to take control of what goes on in your own classroom and create the curriculum of your dreams. All right, let's get back into the show. Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching. Hello, Amanda.
Oh, hi, Marie.
Today, friends, we continue our kind of disjointed, but still a little series of author interviews this fall. And we are so excited to welcome back onto the podcast our bestie. Can we just say it? Our best.
Yes.
Ruta Sepetys. And we are also joined today by her writing partner on their latest project, Steve Sheinkin, who I was so excited to talk to him. I didn't realize that I knew didn't put together that I already knew his works. And so it was such a cool conversation.
We have loved kind of making Ruta a household name here around the podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
Same with our other authors as well. It's so cool to now. I think this is the first person that we've had a revisit. I mean, we haven't talked to Ruta in a couple years, and it was so good. Well, I mean, we're besties, so we've talked to her.
Besties.
We haven't. But we're so pumped because she has a new book. She and Steve have co-authored this new book, and it is Ruta's first foray into the middle grades genre. And I know that we have so many middle school teacher listeners that are going to be thrilled to have something that's a little bit more approachable for some younger readers. The other YA stuff from Ruta's is, I mean, it's tough content-wise and writing-wise. So this is a really exciting new development.
It is. And honestly, my favorite part of this whole interview was listening to them talk about how hard it was to get started working together because they're both used to being such solo artists that then combining and then finally just saying, you know what, we just got to lay it all on the table. Let's just go for it. It was, we don't get enough of that. I think really candid, just this is how it is to truly collaborate in an art form and just in work in general. That's something that I would love students to be able to hear is grownups who are professionals in their field and really successful professionals talk about actively struggling at this point in their successful careers. Yeah, that was really cool, I thought.
So if you are not, maybe you're just joining us for the first time, maybe you've not heard our other interviews with Ruta, but let me give you a little bit of background about who Ruta is as an author and a human. Marie will introduce you a bit more to Steve, and then we can hop right in. So Ruta, she is, of course, an internationally acclaimed #1 New York Times best-selling author. And she is in this historical fiction genre, and she's published in, over 60 countries, over 40 languages. She is someone who I think both students and adults really, really enjoy. We're actually discussing Fountains of Silence in my adult book club very, very soon. And so that's really what's very unique about her. She's also won the Carnegie Medal. And we know from kind of watching her on Instagram and being part of her, conversations with her, she is a dedicated researcher. And a lot of that came from her interest in her own heritage as the daughter of a Lithuanian refugee. So, she really got interested in her own heritage and the lack of stories that she was able to find from her own, experience in her family. And that really kind of led to this journey that she's on, which is, continuing to uncover silenced or ignored or never, right? Stories that have just never been told or shared.
Covered stories. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then our other author, Steve Sheinkin, was actually a former textbook writer. And he very cheekily says that he is now making amends by writing books that people actually want to read. Well, young people might actually want to read. He's written many fast-paced cinematic nonfiction, as they're called, including books like Bomb, Fallout, Undefeated, Born to Fly. Many of those are on the shelf of my own home right now. The Impossible Escape, and the latest, The Bletchley Riddle. He is a middle grade historical mystery writer. In this one, they've written the mystery together. And so most of his is historical fiction. I misspoke, but they came together to weave and unravel a historical mystery, which is, I'm telling you, you're just going to go, wow, how cool is that? Like, it was hearing the two of them also get all excited when they've been on kind of like a media circuit tour, but they still were able to get excited and go, oh yeah, we never talked about this before, like pieces of it that we talked about in our interview. Steve is also a Newbery Honor winner. He's got 3 Boston Globehorn Book Awards, a Cyber Medal and Honor, 3 National Book Finalist honors. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And he lives in New York with his family in Saratoga Springs. And he was absolutely delightful to talk to. And like, I started to geek out a lot because I'm getting more and more into middle grade books as my own kiddos are getting older. But yeah, we're excited for y'all to hear it.
I think this episode would be awesome to share with students, whether your kids are going to be reading Bletchley Riddle or they're reading anything Sepetys in nature, or if you have a creative writing class, for them to hear this conversation between 2 writers is so fascinating. So listen with an open mind, not just for yourself, but maybe for a lesson coming up soon.
Absolutely. Okay, friends, without any further ado, cue the music.
You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a teacher from Southern California.
Join us at bravenewteaching.com to find out more about our courses, festivals, and get every episode's show notes.
We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our amazing and highly anticipated interview with the one and only Ruta Sepetys and her writing partner on an upcoming book, Steve Sheinkin. We are so excited to have you both here on the Brave New Teaching podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. So good to be back.
Thank you.
So we have introduced you already. Our listeners are like, yes, we know their entire life story, but we do want to hear it from both of you. Ruta, will you catch us up a bit on what you have been doing since we last heard from you? I think the last thing that we were talking about was which book? I know. I was going to say, I know that we talked about You, the Story, and that was, that was after I Must Betray You. What have you been doing? What haven't you been doing, really?
Oh my goodness. I have been writing. I have been researching for new projects, but also I've been working with teachers and students on I Must Betray You. The book is being used for all class reads, all school reads. And then I've been using You, the Story, to help students and teachers with creative writing. And it's just been a blast. There have been so many great stories, epic stories that have come out of some classrooms. So maybe those will be future books. Who knows?
That is so cool. I cannot wait. I've actually quick little humble brag. I have been revamping some of the creative parts of my 11th grade curriculum, my 11th grade English curriculum. And so we've got some excerpts from You, the Story, that are going to be prompting us. And I am really excited to talk about it. And I will send you some of the cool stuff that kids make.
Please do.
Yes, that's going to be
That's
cool.
awesome. And we would love to hear from you, Steve. What is your story? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in the writing world and what's kind of led you here to this interview, this collaboration, this new book we're going to talk about today? What's going on in your life?
Yeah, I'll give a really quick version, which is I've always been into writing. I just always loved kind of creative. It started really for me in school, like junior high, with making comics and little videos, little movies, just to entertain my friends, and had nothing to do with school. In fact, I wasn't very that good of an English student when it came to assignments, but I always knew I wanted to be some kind of writer. And I tried a lot of different ways. I worked on movies and wrote short stories, and eventually, I'm really skipping through time fast. I got this job as a textbook writer, mostly social studies, civics, history, things like that. So I always apologize when I go to schools for that, because I know those books are really boring. I mean, we're talking about, making things fun to read and engaging, and that's the opposite of what textbooks do. But I learned a lot by doing it wrong for a long, long time. And I really fell in love with history in a way that I hadn't as a kid, because I always thought history was boring when I was in school. And so I started taking all that stuff, all those true stories, these dramatic, high-stakes stories from different times and places, and saying, maybe I can do this as straight-ahead nonfiction. You don't have to make anything up, and I can make it as exciting to read as any novel. And that's kind of the goal that I set for myself over these last 10 books or so.
That is so cool. I will say, so as the mom of an incoming middle schooler, my son is 11 and he is obsessed with all things historical fiction and nonfiction. And he's not alone. Like all of his friends, in a way that I don't even remember my friends, and I was pretty into books, talking about reading the things that are coming out in the publishing world from writers like the two of you right now are just making kids talk about books and literature and history in a way that, like, I don't remember us talking about it, but maybe I was just gone. No, they weren't. And no. It's very cool to watch this generation of kids get so invested in stories and like organically talk to each other about it. Like, what 11-year-old boys are in the pool in the middle of the summer and they're nerdy, I'm the nerdy English teacher mom just listening into their conversation, and they're talking about like a historical fiction graphic novel that they were reading.
No, I was talking about Flowers in the Attic.
Oh.
Remember that?
Oh
I was playing mermaids. Like I was like, not, yeah. It's a testament to the work that authors like you two are doing. It really does hook kids in such a cool way that, like, I as a mom and a teacher really appreciate it. So
we can't do it without teachers. And I think Steve will agree that many students wouldn't find our work without those teachers. They're hidden heroes. And we're so lucky to work with them.
Yeah, I want to second that. Every chance I get, especially with teachers and librarians, I try to say that, because I know I do this incredibly, to me, fun job for a living, and it just wouldn't exist if all I did is sit in this room and write the books. They'd be just as good, but no one would know about them. So it's up to you guys to make those connections.
Well, I'm sure that feels good to hear. Our teachers who are listening I think need those reminders, because it is a war zone out there when it comes to books. And I think that so much of that, like politics aside, I feel like when there's a lot of controversy about books, it means there's a lot of new ideas coming out and joining the world. And like, that to me is exciting, but it's also exhausting. So I think that teachers really appreciate hearing that from you. And I mean, I am dying to know, okay, so we talked to Ruta about, solo so many times, but now we've got Steve, and I want to know how you guys came together to write this incredible story. By the way, I'm the only one that's read it. We only got one copy. So I am like the sneaky behind the scenes person here. Marie has only read like the jacket. So I know the story, and I'm sure our listeners, they won't know it until they pick it up. But I want to know how you guys met to write this incredible story.
Yeah, we should try not to give too many spoilers then, Ruta, I guess. But it's good we're amongst nerds today. We can talk openly.
Really?
I'd say that's because that's really how we met. I mean, we were admirers of each other's books before we met each other. But then we started winding up on panels together that really were, history but not boring. But they wouldn't use that phrase, but that's a nice way of saying that was the title of the panel. And serious, and that's what we like to do. We take on these big, serious, high stakes stories, but we try to tell them as page turners. And so it made sense that we would be on panels together. And it was actually a question that Ruta got at a panel from an educator, of course, where all these great ideas come from, asking her who she might want to collaborate with, living or, I think it was actually living or dead.
Correct.
As if she could pick Tolstoy or something. But we looked at each other, down this long panel table, and there was a moment there where it just kind of clicked. And that was long before we had an idea, but we did talk afterwards, just for a few minutes before leaving for the airport, maybe we should do something together. And we started looking through our notebooks, and that was kind of the beginning. But even before we had an idea, we really loved the concept of doing something together.
It was a meet cute.
Yeah. It's just,
Exactly.
well, and so I want to kind of follow up a little bit. Then how did you decide what topic you were going to cover, or what? Talk about a vast offering of ideas, right? Or did one of you already have this idea in mind, and then you were like, "Hey, I've got this idea. What do you think?" How did that process of collaborating, and just even from idea inception, where did that come from?
Well, after the panel that day, we traded email addresses. And mind you, we had been represented by the same agent for many years, and we were aware of each other's work. Steve blurbed my book, Salt to the Sea, many years ago. So we've always been sort of working in the same orbit. And then the pandemic arrived, and Steve reached out and said, "Hey, let's really talk about this in earnest." We threw around so many ideas. I think I might have scared Steve because, we each have these like notebooks that we live with where all of our ideas live, right? All the story ideas. We carry them around. And so then here's Steve Sheinkin. Okay, we're going to open up our notebooks of ideas to each other. And mine were, some of them were pretty heavy. Some were pretty creepy. So we threw those out right away. And then we thought, well, what if we do a fiction and a nonfiction treatment? So we choose a topic. I write, a fictional story, and Steve writes a nonfiction, but it's bound together, maybe even with different covers that you turn the book over. And then we kind of threw that away and said, no, let's work on something together. Let's work. It should be fiction. And then Steve brought up the idea that he had long been fascinated with code breaking and with Bletchley Park. And I knew of Bletchley Park and the relation to World War II, that it was this ultra secret code breaking center during the war. But when Steve started explaining it, he started sharing some aspects of hidden history around code breaking that I wasn't aware of. And you guys know me. I mean, I'm looking for that hidden history.
Like, then you were hooked, right? Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
You're like, say less. Yeah.
Well, first of all, here's like this Wonka-esque code breaking factory, right?
Oh, cool.
That was so cool, with like, walls that speak and stairs that creak and windows that are rattling on the wind. I was so in. For me, it was really that, hidden history element. So then we have this idea. And, oh, well, great. Then how do you collaborate? How do you write a book together? And we discovered that our processes are a little different. Steve, maybe you want to speak to that revelation.
Yes. I mean, I always love hearing people talk about their process, and novelists always, they talk about being a pantser versus a plotter, right? Isn't that the term? Yeah. Okay. And I just love hearing, and the other thing they always say, is something like, well, the story was going one way, but then this character started speaking to me. And they wouldn't go away, and I listened to them, and this changed the whole direction. And I always thought that sounded pretty wacky, but this process was very new to me, because when you do nonfiction, it's nothing like that. I still want all the elements of a great story, but I have to find them in the research, because I can't make anything up. And so I'm a real plotter. And that may also just be personality as well. But I love making cards, index cards. They're puzzles, essentially. They're outlines. And each little piece is a different color. And I put them together on the wall like you see in detective shows. And it just really works for me to plot everything out. So I didn't know anything about how Ruta worked, but it turns out Like
Ruta
most
doesn't work
novelists,
like that.
does not do that. And so that was very different. I mean, we zeroed in on a time and place, the summer of 1940 during the Battle of Britain. So we had a really good outline just from the timeline of all the incredible things that happened in that summer. But then beyond that, it was much more. And I think Ruta's going to disagree with me, because I felt that it was much more pantser than I was expecting. But I think you're disagreeing,
No
right?
way. No
Yeah.
way. Oh my gosh, it was not pantser. This was plotter. I'm a total pantser. History provides the outline, and I'm the cliche writer. I'm like a barefoot songwriter. I show up at my keyboard. I light a candle. I have some tea, and I want the characters to speak to me. And I kept talking to Steve about, well, rhythm. What's the flow? What's the rhythm? I don't hear the rhythm yet. And Steve, we would have these epic plotting sessions where we would each have marching orders of what was going to happen in the chapter. I never know what's going to happen in a chapter. So for me, yes, that was quite organized. And then we'd go to our separate corners, write, and then we'd exchange chapters, which was really fun and exciting.
Are you both saying pantser, like the surprise of somebody getting pantsed?
Oh, like fly by the seat of your pants.
Oh,
Oh yeah, we should have explained that. It's weird.
So I'm in the education world, right?
Of
So all I
course,
can think
Marie,
of is
yeah.
one kid going to another kid and going foom and pantsing them. And then I was like, I guess that would be a surprise. And then I made it all work. The way you just explained it makes a lot more sense than the cuckoo bananas way that I just interpreted.
No, but there
Pantser.
was an element of that. In what way?
Surprise.
Well, in that feeling super vulnerable and exposed. This is Steve Sheinkin, and I have a writing group, but I've been with my writing group for 20 years, and they know my work. All of a sudden, I have to send my draft chapters, which aren't pruned and revised, and they're a draft, and I have to send them to Steve Sheinkin, Newbery Honor, 3-time National Book Award, finalist. Like, it was scary for me, and I felt a little intimidated, but I found my way, and we found a rhythm. Yeah.
I think that was actually and I felt the same way about sending stuff to you, but I think that actually worked in our favor, or it did for me, I should say, because I wanted to surprise Ruta. I wanted, to make you laugh, maybe come up with a twist that we hadn't outlined. And here's where I really grew as a writer, I think, because I am such an outliner. I said, maybe here's something we didn't talk about when we were plotting. I'll throw this in at the end and see what she thinks. And it became part of the dynamic of writing, was to send each other these short bits and even to surprise one another as we went along.
That's such a cool lesson. I can't help myself, right? It's such a cool lesson in just flexibility. You're both so accomplished at what you do in the way that you do it, and then coming together and finding a way to not just mesh what each of you does, but to teach each other about your own methods and methodologies. I think that then creates this episode being an opportunity to be something that's student facing, to hear about how professionals collaborate. So group projects don't end at 12th grade or even in higher education. Group projects can be both really rewarding and fun. And also it sounds like extremely hard work because of the way that you have to develop your communication skills to get your thoughts across to somebody else when you don't necessarily do things. It might look similar because it's all words, but it's so epically different in the way that you process your ideas. I love that.
I think there are amazing things that can happen when energies are combined. And I think that students often feel or hear that writing is this solitary endeavor. It doesn't have to be. It really doesn't have to be. And you both learn and grow together. And yes, it does require, respect. When I was writing a chapter, I wrote the character of Lizzie and Steve wrote the character of Jacob. And when I was writing my Lizzie chapters, if Jacob was speaking, when I would flip the chapter to Steve, I'd say, okay, just go in. And, I felt hesitant to write his character's dialogue. Mm-hmm. And Steve was respectful kind of the same way.
That's cool.
Well, that must have been such a shift from always being in charge of all of your characters. And that's kind of what we wanted to ask you a little bit more about. do you know, like, when were the moments when you kind of knew that those two characters felt complete, right? Like if your entire writing process is being that one person, I mean, obviously it's also, right, the arc and, you know, the other things, but how did you know when you knew your two characters?
Well, I will say one thing though, is I was trying to kill off characters until the very last chapter. Of course. And Steve even has like comment bubbles where, you know, on the dock where I'm like, I love this gentleman. It's so sad he has to die. And he's like, no, he's not dying.
He's not
but
dying.
When did I feel a character was complete? I'm so interested to hear Steve's response. For me, my character of Lizzie, you know, if his character Jacob is a code breaker, my character Lizzie is a rule breaker. And near the end of the story, there's a scene where Lizzie is on the phone with her friend Marion. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but things have transpired and Lizzie has grown. The old Lizzie would have chattered about everything, but now Lizzie is able to sit quietly and comfortably within a secret. And I was like, oh, okay. And I knew that Lizzie had grown there. And then there's a scene near the end with Colin. And I'll just say that. I'll just leave it at that. And so there was, I felt like, yeah, I felt quietly so happy. Steve, what about you and Jacob? When did you know?
Yeah, I mean, it took me a while to get to know him, again, in this way that novelists speak about. But I really enjoyed that process. And I began with just things that I knew were true in terms of his age and his educational background and the things that he was really good at, and then throwing him into this situation. But I feel like getting to know him, the key for me was realizing that even though he's quite brilliant at mathematics and code breaking, and in other ways, he's really young emotionally. He's been kind of skipping grades and going off to these schools since he was a young age. And he's never really grown up in some ways. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a really important, I guess, I don't know if you could call it a discovery, but yeah, in terms of, I feel like that really allowed me to kind of round out his character in a way that felt really real to me. And in terms of the way he relates to other people. And of course, how he relates to Lizzie, which is such a big part. The dynamic between them, I would say, is the biggest part of the whole story. And so really kind of figuring out what it was about him that's kind of causing some of that conflict. That really was a big insight for me.
I think that's so relatable for students too. I mean, I think there are a lot of kids out there who are going to get that from both of these characters. And I don't know, for me reading Bletchley, and I've read all of Ruta's. Steve, I've not read any of your work yet, but I feel like both of them feel brand new to me. They don't feel like, right? They don't feel like characters I've seen before in this genre or in YA. And I think that was to me very, very exciting. So from a reader's perspective, they both felt very uniquely kind of in their own element. So that was exciting for me.
Oh, thank you. That's a huge compliment. Lizzie, to create Lizzie, I read a lot of oral history testimony and listened to interviews with, women who had been as young as 14. And I was trying to think, what kind of a young woman who could do this? She must be quite plucky. And I remember, reading an interview with a woman who was asked about her time at Bletchley when she was a teenager. And she said, allow me to explain something. And she just had such a direct tone of voice. And so I thought, I'm going to take that for Lizzie and build her, through that kind of strong young archetype.
I am wondering, Ruta, since we know that you like to leave Easter eggs and kind of echoes of other stories, different places, is there anything, with no spoilers, is there anything or anyone that might feel familiar or Easter eggy from previous works in this one?
Oh, people who know my work, they know there's Easter eggs that, like, someone at an event said, I'm sorry, but is this a reference to the band Def Leppard? And I was like, indeed it is. Like, there's all sorts of, it's so crazy in my work. And yes, in all of my books, I have a reference to Charles Dickens, some type of reference. And there is one in here from the Pickwick Papers. And it was not even my necessarily idea, but yes, there are. And then the book itself is full of Easter eggs. There are, look closely, you read the book, but then go back and look closely. And there are so many hidden codes, riddles. There are photo sections and ephemera sections. Look closely. So yeah, I think it's full of Easter eggs.
That sounds like so much fun to create too. It's like a escape room within a riddle within, like, how fun.
That's a great way to put it. An escape room within a novel. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That's cool.
Okay, so Steve, then I'm curious for you, how are you kind of tackling that obstacle of kind of writing some of the lesser known historical, stories, but still kind of staying true to the historical accuracy, all those details? How does that go for you?
It's all about the story to me. I always come back to that. And even though we're talking so much about how different writing fiction was to nonfiction, it's still 80, I don't know, I'm going to make up a number, 84% the same, because it's really all about story. And for us in this book, we really want it to be quite accurate. Yes, it is fiction. Yes, we're making up these characters, but the setting is real. The stakes are real. The timeline is real. Many of the characters are real. And we really wanted to stick to that. So for me, with this book and others, it's all about finding those elements of a great story in the research. Characters, the plot twists, the high stakes, the building to some exciting climactic action. And so part of the reason that we zeroed in on this summer of 1940 for our story, the Bletchley Riddle, is that it's all there. I mean, it is all there. Britain is standing alone. American students sometimes pick up World War II with Pearl Harbor, maybe, and don't realize, well, this was a year and a half before that. The rest of Western Europe has been completely knocked out by the Germans at this point. And Britain really was standing alone. And we know how it turns out now, but this was not, it wasn't inevitable that Britain would survive that summer. And the things that were happening at Bletchley were really important to that. And so we have everything you could need for a story, and that we wanted to really stick to that timeline. And I know both Ruta and I came up with and found things that were so exciting that we wanted to put in, but that didn't fit in that timeline. And then becomes a question. And I think it's actually a subjective question, but can you use stuff? Can you play with time a little bit? I mean, after all, it is fiction. And I know Ruta's going to be shaking her head no as I asked that question, because I thought you could. And I thought novelists did that all the time. And I guess some do.
You did get a head shake. You definitely got a head shake.
I saw that.
No. I feel a tremendous responsibility in my work. This is underrepresented history, and I want to bring this history to readers as authentically as possible, down to the last detail, so but Steve, you're the same with that. You're so responsible.
There's just, like, for example, when you read about Bletchley Park, it's just a flood of wonderful things, but part of the Secret Service, the MI6 that was running Bletchley Park was called the Government Code and Cipher School, which is just wonderful. You can't make that up. No. And they've put in a London newspaper, they put a crossword puzzle, a really hard one, which you can find online. And they said there was just this little kind of cryptic note at the bottom. If you can solve this in 12 minutes, send in your solution with your name and address. And people who could do that were invited to this location in London to given another test. They were this was the government looking for puzzle solvers. Of course, they had already recruited people from Oxford and Cambridge. They were looking for so-called ordinary people, but who had this brilliant skill. Most of them turned out to be women who could solve these puzzles really quickly. And so isn't that just kind of an obvious way to start a story, as someone looking in the newspaper and seeing this puzzle, and how do you not use that? And then, like I said, you can find the puzzle online, but unfortunately for us, sticklers, the date was in 1941. And so I really did approach it as a question, saying, Ruta, can we use this?
And I was so terrible. I was like, no. Is our story set in 1941? But those are the kind of things that I lay awake at night about. I mean, there are people who have dedicated years, decades to studying Bletchley Park, writing books about it, writing academic papers. And then all of a sudden, here's our story, 1940, and they know, oh no, those crosswords weren't used until 1941. I feel like we would not only be disrespecting history, but disrespecting the custodians and the stewards of history who have worked so hard to, archive and preserve those details and facts.
I think so. I'm not going to take us on a bird walk here or a side quest too far, but this is kind of relevant. It's relevant, but I
don't want last words. Yeah,
I know, they really are. But Ruta, you said something that I think really just kind of like had a little ding moment with me. And I think that when you said that these are underrepresented stories, they're more hidden histories. And I wonder if that true to the research and true to the history maybe weighs heavier than on overrepresented stories or stories that are told more often. So like I'm thinking about like the controversy we've seen around like Bridgerton, right? Like Shonda Rhimes has created this entirely, right, like historical fiction, heavy on the fiction world, right? And like and of course Julia, the writer of the books. And I feel like that's completely done nothing of what you said, but right, this era of history is something that is not new to us. It's very familiar. And I think that maybe that artistic shifting of stories is different based on what you're trying to do or who you're trying to represent or which story you're trying to tell. I don't know. Did I totally derail us here? But that's what I'm thinking about.
No, you didn't derail us at all. And for the record, I love Bridgerton, right? Mm-hmm. I love it. And so different. And I love the presentation, even in the TV series where they're using contemporary music in this period drama. So I'm not against that at all. I love it. It's just for me. And I wonder if this is a very personal aspect because I am Lithuanian American and came from a very underrepresented culture. And when I would give my name, Ruta Sepetys, people would say, "What are you?" And I'd say, "I'm Lithuanian." And then that would be the end of the conversation because no one knew what that meant. I feel that might be a personal hang up of mine, trying to express that identity and others who might be in a similar position. So I think it might just be me, but I don't know, Steve, what do you think? Do you like when people take a historical time period and just really taffy pull it in a fun way?
Yeah, I think that can be really fun, and I do like it. I think you hit on it when you said it depends what you're trying to do. So I think there's room for everything, but we were pretty clear on this that what we were trying to do involved being very realistic to history. Yeah. And then the challenge became because we're so dedicated to story first that, how do we turn this into a mystery? How do we turn this into a page turner? But that's the fun part, figuring out the puzzle of how to do that, to me, is what makes writing fun.
So since we're talking about story and the uncovering, right? Like digging around and puzzling together, I would like to get into what we always talk about. And we really stumped Ruta, I think the first time we spoke to you when we were asking you about questions for students. So Steve, so that we are very much committed to building curriculum in classrooms and teaching and helping and supporting other teachers to build curriculum that is driven in inquiry, where we're giving them questions, but then those questions beget other questions. And that's how they explore topics and materials within a curriculum. What sorts of questions could you both see students exploring with the Bletchley Riddle, or like using the Bletchley Riddle to explore these questions? That's really like the texts are the vehicle for exploration, and then that's where the learning takes place. That was a very long way to say. Do you have any questions for kids?
Yeah, always. I mean, I agree. I think it's a great approach, and it's the kind of thing that would have worked for me as a kid, asking those kinds of questions instead of saying, memorize this, or what's the theme of this? I still don't know what they meant by that. It's just kind of funny to have kids in high school and they say, "Dad, what's the theme of this book?" I say, I don't know. I never really, never knew what they were talking about when they said that, but because it was just so, of course I could give the answer they wanted, but it wasn't that I didn't feel like they were really getting into what the story was really about. So it's a really good question to think that way. I mean, I love looking for these kind of parallels between stories of what does this remind you of this time period where these young people were facing this challenge? And that would be a really interesting question. Find another time when these teenagers were in this high stakes situation and were really able to make a difference, where being smart and resourceful really, really gave them an edge and really made a difference in history. And I think they could find some really interesting parallels.
Yeah. And two things with regard to Bletchley. One applies to all of my work. You know, one of the questions that I always want students to ask is, what determines how history is preserved and recalled? I would ask that with even my book, I Must Betray You. That's about the Romanian Revolution. How can we know about the fall of the Berlin Wall? We know nothing about Romania. My book, Salt to the Sea. Why do we know about the Titanic, but we don't know about the largest maritime disaster in history? So what determines how history is preserved and recalled? And with Bletchley, there is underrepresented history. I mean, that I was even shocked to learn. And then the second question is, what is the impact of a secret? What is the impact of a secret? And the
I'll
reason
write that down, Ruta.
Right? Because these people who were working at Bletchley throughout the war, there were, Steve, over 7,000 people? Is that
Eventually, yes.
Over 7,000 people. And the people associated, they had to sign what's known as the Official Secrets Act. They swore an oath that they would never breathe a word, not to their parents, not to their spouse. This part of their life remained an absolute secret. What is the impact of that? And could that happen today? Do students think when they read the Bletchley Riddle and see what thousands of people were keeping secret, could we do that today? Would it work?
And then I wonder, that gets me going, what else don't we know? Because it was buried completely.
Oh, Marie, so much.
Right?
So much. Oh my gosh.
What's undiscoverable because it is completely
buried,
bound.
I am convinced that some of the most interesting, important, and moving stories, they still remain untold. They do.
Well, I'm sure. That's so fascinating.
And with regard to the Bletchley Riddle, there's a storyline that Steve stumbled upon that we knew we had to put in, and we could because of the time period it matched. But this
you were allowed.
Totally, yeah, permission granted. The legendary codebreaker Alan Turing, who was just so brilliant in so many ways, and he was very concerned about the German invasion and cashed in his life savings into silver bars. And Alan Turing buried them outside the gates of Bletchley Park. And he created a cipher, like a map for himself. So when the war ended, he could go back and, dig up his silver. He never found his silver.
Wow.
And so we've woven that into the story. What happened to that silver and where is it? Where is that silver? And we want readers to find it.
Yeah, I've been waiting 2 seasons to find out where the Jacobite gold is in Outlander. So, I mean, we need to know where all the buried treasure is, Ruta. I think this
Outlander.
Jamie Fraser is
the Jacobite gold. So many questions.
So what you're saying is that in the Bletchley Riddle, we actually have time travel. Is that where we're going with this conversation?
No, but buried treasure is universally exciting for every reader on planet Earth. So that's really cool.
For me and Steve too.
So much. Irresistible from being a young reader to this day. The best present of my life that I ever got was a metal detector where I was sure I was going to find pirate treasure in my, in the suburbs of New York City somehow.
Of course.
But why wouldn't it be there?
Yeah.
Love it.
And it also gets at that, it kind of comes back to the question, which I always come back to in all of my work, is of contradiction. And because so much of U.S. history, or any history, or, I'm writing about the U.S., it could be true of any country, but is deeply rooted contradiction. And in many U.S. stories, it has to do with these beautiful ideals, which we don't always live up to, happening at the same exact time. And that's certainly true of World War II stories.
Oh, yeah.
And it's certainly true within characters. I mean, I think this is more of an English teacher kind of thing, is to think about rounding characters by giving them, like all of us, these contradictions. And Alan Turing is such a good example of that. I spent a lot of time researching, for instance, Robert Oppenheimer. who's had his moment recently, but he's always been pretty well known. I mean, what a walking contradiction that guy was. But when you're a genius who can't remember where he put his silver, there's a lot. There's so much there and so interesting, and it would take hours to talk about all the interesting parts of his character. But from a writing standpoint, when you find people like that, it's just it feels like a gift to get him on the page. And we both kind of introduced him in just little bits and pieces in our chapters. And I don't know, Ruta, I thought that was really fun too, and also something that was humbling. All right, let me see if I can try to get this right, because he's such an important and amazing person.
Amazing person and such a genius, yet so profoundly human, And I loved that. To me, that was so interesting. And the way that some of the movies have depicted, Alan Turing, and then the accounts we read, he really was wonderful with kids. And that was something that hadn't been, maybe shared. So there is a scene, where, Jacob interacts with him, Lizzie interacts with him. And I just loved showing that profoundly human moment. And like Steve said, that juxtaposition, these opposing elements, right? That's what creates pacing and creates friction in music. It's major and minor chords. In stories, you have Beauty and the Beast. It's an old device, but I also think it's something that's absolutely like an essential truth of the human experience, that we are this, tapestry of juxtaposition, all of us,
Oh, absolutely. And I think most often we hear it called flaws, right? Like that we're all inherently flawed. But I like the idea of saying we're walking contradictions.
Beautiful.
Because that's what we are. We have to be. Otherwise, we're robots.
Exactly.
But I have to tell you both that this is absolutely fascinating. And I cannot wait for my son to get a hold of I can't wait to read this book myself, but I can't wait for my kid to get a hold of this book, because I think he is going to absolutely like I told you, they're talking in the pool this summer about like what they're reading. I think that his little group of friends is going to annihilate the Bletchley Riddle. Like they're going to just eat it up. So I can't wait.
Excellent. We're so excited to be on the road. We're going to be on the road for 3 weeks straight, doing school visits,
it's gonna be cool.
Doing bookstore events in the evening, because we want to meet your son. We want to meet the young readers. We feel it's just such an honor and a privilege. We're so honored to write for young readers and work with educators.
I'm just so excited for teachers to see this book. I mean, that's really what I'm the most excited about. And I know, kids too, but mostly I feel like teachers are going to have just such a fun time thinking through the possibilities of how a story like this, right, with alternating points of view, with dual authorship, right, from structure to character to these big questions. I feel like Bletchley's got a really cool and important place in a curriculum. And I'm just so thankful that we have another beautiful story to share with teachers. So thank you so much for sharing it with us and with everyone else.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
I also think about like I was saying before about like a escape room, but when I start thinking about classroom applications and how to like immerse students in theme and story, just first of all, riddles that could be just like little ways that we can like pull and help students through a story with discovery and with solving puzzles. And there are so many cool opportunities that don't always show up in historical fiction, right? Like they normally show up in like straight up fantasy fiction. But this is going to be ripe with possibilities for classroom applications, which is exciting because that doesn't happen often.
From the get-go, the cover beneath the cover. Look closely on the cover. Jim Tierney designed the gorgeous cover of the Bletchley Riddle. And you see a cover, you see the title. Look again. And then look again. There's so many hidden layers to uncover and discover. And these students are so smart, way smarter than me. They're going to, decipher this pretty quickly, I think.
Oh, that's so exciting. Well, thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Any way we can support you. And we want to thank, your listeners who support us. Again, Steve and I, we owe so much to all of the teachers and librarians who put our books into the hands of students, right, Steve?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Can't say that often enough because it's absolutely true. Making those connections, you're talking about your kid, your son and his friends, and they wouldn't know about me if it weren't for you, but you you like this book. Maybe you would like, and that's just so essential to letting us do this really fun job.
Well, speaking then of teachers and advocates for readers finding you, where can they find? Well, first of all, your book, The Bletchley Riddle, is going to be available everywhere. Yes, everywhere you can get books?
Everywhere. Audio, ebook, many languages. For those teachers who have students who are reading in different languages. Yep, it's on sale everywhere.
Okay, that's amazing. And then where can we find you both to see more of the amazing things that you do?
I have a website that's simply my name, stevesheinkin.com. And that has all my books and connections to anything that I do online. And so that's just a really good place to start.
There will be an educator's guide for the Bletchley Riddle that Penguin is putting together. And I'll post that as well on my site, rutasepetys.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Ruta Sepetys Author and on Twitter and Facebook at Ruta Sepetys. I'm on Goodreads. And I also want to give a shout out to Steve's YouTube channel, Author Fan Face Off, which is amazing. It's this game show where readers face off against the author in trivia challenges about the book. And I did it for my book, Between Shades of Grey, and I lost.
That almost always happened. We've done like 80 episodes. I do it with a librarian and awesome. We find kids who are super fans of the books and they almost always defeat the author. And I love that. I love it. It's a beautiful thing.
I'm not an author, but kids are constantly quoting me to me. And I'm like, who said that? And they're like, you did. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's no way that was me.
That's fun.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Oh, yay. Well, we can't wait to hear more about it when teachers start getting it. We'll be sure to pass along reactions and what everyone has to say. And we're just so grateful for you both. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really fun.
All right. Hopefully we'll be able to do a follow-up in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.